Awesome. Okay, now it's working. Okay, and I just remembered that if you're not speaking in a microphone, no one can hear you on the recording. So it's vitally important that yeah, you want to. I don't know. That doesn't sound like it's working. Okay,
Hello.
cool. Yeah. So awesome. Well, we will start in just a minute or two. Yeah. So thank y'all. Make sure you grab some pizza if you're hungry. Please do. And you all good?
I think so.
I'll let you take it away. Set this probably right. Yeah, there we go. Awesome.
All right. So, good evening, everyone. I'm Travis Smith. I'm the Director of Engineering at Shift Interactive. Oh, there we go. Sounds better. Just to start with, the everything that I'm going to show you today is actually on my website. So, for example, if you want to follow along, you can go to travissmith.dev. And if you go up to conferences and there's a little bit of delay here, and if you go to view slides on this first one at the top there, you can view the slides. Also, I do have links to 3 different repos that I will be also talking through today. So they are public and you can access them. So I jump into the slides. I don't know if my internet's a little choppy right now, so there we go. Okay. So, when it comes to what we're going to cover today is focusing on cutting through the hype around AI testing and focus on what actually works in production. We've been integrating AI into some solutions at Shift, and I want to focus, explain to you kind of what has worked for us as well as things that you want to maybe skip or avoid. We're going to look at some real live examples or real code examples and live demos. And then also I'm going to leave you with a decision framework that you can use immediately. So let's see if this works. There we go. There really is a delay. It's like a 5-second delay. Sorry. So one of the solutions that we're going to talk through is I'm going to give you an example. If let's say you have a moderation AI solution. It is something that you're using to help with having user-generated content that you want to moderate to see if there is harmful posts in it, and you want to focus on that. When you consider traditional testing, you're immediately faced with certain questions that can't just be simply answered. For example, like how do you know that the AI is being accurately responding? How do you know that it's responding quickly enough? How do you know that the costs that you're anticipating with using the AI model are in reasonable threshold that you're wanting? And then finally, maybe what guardrails are in the place to ensure that your AI model is responding appropriately when challenged? And then finally, if it's working now, how do you ensure that it's still working 6 months from now? Well, we're gonna one technique that you can use is metrics-driven development, and there we go. Okay, so and that is around the idea that you are essentially defining metrics before you start building. And then you're instrumenting the system to continuously capture those metrics as you're interacting with your AI system. You might start with having some ground truth data that you have validation tests that run against before you deploy. And then you also will kind of use those metrics to drive your development decisions as you move forward in development process. And this is something that you would not typically want to use for just any application. There is a high cost to this. There's basically you have to not only pay to have tests run against an actual AI model, but you also have a lot of overhead in terms of the infrastructure set up to do this. So we're going to go through an actual example of a repo that I put together for this particular case. And I'm going to jump into that. I'm going to stop sharing. Oh, sorry. Actually, I don't need to stop sharing. I can just jump into it. So let's see here. So let's see if that actually shows up now. Okay, there we go. It's really kind of fuzzy for me here. Can you guys see this pretty well? Okay, do I need to make it bigger at all? Okay.
All the lights go off. No, I got option.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so just let me know if I need to make any adjustments. I can make it bigger if I need to. So getting bigger and bigger. Okay. All right. So they can't hear me? Okay, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Hello? 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 Okay, I got an echo. Okay. Do I need to change my settings at all? Mute. Thank you. Okay. No. I'm muted on my computer. This is going well, guys.
Yeah, it's all back there though. What's it gonna be like?
You can check. You can check. It's muted, but I have this audio on. Is that an audio?
Yeah, turn that off.
Okay. That's what I thought I was turning on for people to hear.
No, you're good. Because actually, they're going to capture all audio through the microphone. So that is off. Your computer's muted.
Okay. All right. I'm back to where I was. Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So where was I? Okay. So this example repo that I put out there, what is set up currently to do a couple of things. So first off, it has already deterministic tests that are related to testing and basically the functionality of the moderation outside of actually testing the AI model and the prompt that I'm giving it. So there is right now a number of tests that will run that actually are just mocking or using test doubles for the actual AI model. And so, for example, is if I, and sorry, I need to type over my shoulder here. So I apologize. I need to duplicate my screen. I wasn't expecting this. A second here. There we go. Okay. NPM. So, for example, all of these repos that I'm going to show you today, they all have already traditional testing that's set up that is very much focused on deterministic testing. It's what you would typically do when you're doing traditional automated testing. And so in this case, you can see that I have like 120 tests that are currently passing through different tests that I have set up in my test area. However, when I get to the point where I need to start testing against, validating against certain metrics, I have it currently set up so that I can do that. And before I do that, I will mention that I currently have ground truth data that is currently set up in a file called groundtruth.json. There's actually 50 example moderation posts that I have put together so that I can actually run it against the actual AI model and determine if it is safe or harmful. For example, if I scroll through this, you can see that most of them are safe, but I get to the bottom here, I can see that I have some harmful ones. And one says, "You're worthless and should disappear. I hate all people from that country." Stuff that I wouldn't want to be, I want that to be caught by my moderation AI solution, okay? And so, for example, if I now take this ground truth data and I run validate, what this is going to do is this is actually going to take that ground truth data and it's going to run it against the actual AI model using the prompt that I have currently configured. And this actually takes a little bit to do, and it'll run for a little bit now, and I'll show you what the results are. But this would be something that you would want to be able to set up to run likely before you're doing deployment. You're actually say, you know what, I don't want to run this every time that I'm doing a commit, just because of the sheer time that it takes to get feedback, but also because it is also costing you money every time. It's running against the actual AM model, and it's a small amount of money, but it's like maybe somewhere between 7 cents to 50 cents, whatever, it depends on what your model is and how you have it configured. So that if you consider that this would be something like, hey, I can run my deterministic tests, my 120 tests, and I can get those to run, and that is my fast feedback. Now I get to the point where I have this maybe in a CI/CD pipeline where I say, you know what, I want to run this validation or to validate that these harmful posts are being captured by my prompt, and do it before I actually deploy. And so now this actually finished. And so what this looks like, the results are, is that it's showing that, sorry, I've got a Zoom window in my way here. I can see that right now it's showing that I have 100% precision, 100% recall, and 100% accuracy. And I can also see that my thresholds that I have identified are 85% precision and 90% recall. And so at this point, it's saying that my validation is passed. Now, if you don't know what precision and recall are, precision would be that if I, for example, I had 100, I flagged 100 harmful posts, how many of them were actually really harmful? And so, for example, is if I had 100 posts and 85 of them were considered harmful, then that means that 15 essentially weren't caught, and that would mean that I had 85% precision. In the case of recall, that is going to be basically if I have, 100 posts, and there was 100 that were flagged as harmful, but only 90 actually were caught. That means that 10% aren't getting caught at all. So that would be my recall, and I want, in this case, I want 100% if I can, but in this case, my threshold is set up as 90%. So this is something that you could use to run, but when you're having your prompt and you're having your code in the AI ready to deploy, you could run these validation tests against that and say, oh, okay, if they're not reaching my precision and my recall, then, or they are, first off, I can deploy. But let's say they aren't actually reaching those, and you want to actually, maybe you get a precision that is 70%, and you're like, okay, this is not meeting my validation. Now what I can do is this is where metrics actually drives the development. And you can actually go back and say, okay, I need to make some adjustments to actually my prompt, or maybe I need to change the temperature of what I'm using on the AI model, or you may need to change basically how you're handling things. Maybe you need to handle sarcasm differently. That's one thing I actually found when I was going through this process of building this moderation solution was, well, what happens if I have a prompt or a user content that actually, it appears harmful, but it's really just sarcasm. So the next thing I'm going to show you with this is that if, let's say that you're continuously monitoring the metrics around your system as it's being used over time. In this particular case, I'm going to simulate that. So if I, my keyboard here. If I, for example, I have no metrics currently in the system that I'm tracking, but if I run my metrics, I can see that it says that, oh, metrics dashboard, no metrics available yet. Well, let's say that I'm going to go ahead and start up my app or my API, and so I currently have it started. If I run, and I have some curl commands that I can run to basically put it against it. For example, if I run one that is this one right here, it says basically log off, you suck. Okay, I want to see, first off, it's going to run this against my AI model, and it's going to come back with a result. And this is actually hitting the actual AI model using my API key that I currently have set up with Claude right now. My internet connection is apparently slow. Right? Okay. Must not hit enter. All right, there we go. Okay, sorry about that. So right now it's actually coming back, And it's telling me that, yes, it was flagged. The reason is because it contains toxic language and mild harassment directed at another user. And it gives me a confidence score. And this is something that I actually set up the prompt that I had to make sure that it produces this in this format. Another curl command that I could run that would be different, let's see, is this one right here. So if you're anybody's seen Taken, they should be familiar with this message. I've actually had mixed results with this message because this is, I mentioned earlier that sarcasm was not something that it was handling very well. So this, and when I actually run this, in some cases I've gotten that this comes back as harmful, and this is actually showing up as harmful. In other cases, I've come back and this is flagged. It's not flagged at all, and it's considered safe. And this is where I would want to probably do some more changes to my prompt to basically handle situations like this, because I don't know if I would want this to come back as actually threatening. And this could really very depend on, like, even a one word could change how this result comes back. But you can see right now that it contains threatening language, suggesting intent to harm and intimidate. Other cases, I've ran this thing and the same message, and it even mentions the movie Taken in its reasoning. So, which I thought was interesting. But otherwise, if I did a curl command that was simply let's see, one here. Oh, I got a couple here that I was playing around with. Sorry. Let me go to my example list here. So this would be a one I can use. So this one is, I love this product, works great. So this one should come back as flagged false, and the confidence is 95%. So that's what I would expect it to do. So now I've been able to send 3 messages to my actual moderation API. And so now if I was to run that same command of run metrics, this is basically simulating what basically the data is that's in my database that I've been capturing. And now I can see that I've had three requests. I've had flagged content at 67%. My confidence is 81.7%. I can also see that my daily cost is currently half a cent that it's estimating, okay? So imagine, if you would, if you had every time that you made requests to your API, and then it was basically calling the AI model, that you were tracking every interaction you had with the AI model. You were tracking how much tokens you were using. You were tracking the performance of it, how quickly it was responding. You were continuously monitoring that. Imagine, if you would, if that was like stored in, like, for example, CloudWatch or something, some database that you had, and you set up alarms for it to say, you know what, I want to be alarmed to trigger to alert me when a certain threshold is hit. So maybe my average confidence gets below 80%. I would want to be alerted to that. And then now, as our team would be say, oh, well, it looks like our model is drifting away from what we intended, or we're having issues. That would drive basically what you work on next. It would basically, somebody would come and say, oh, well, let's get a card on our board to go address this and evaluate what we need to do next. And then you might say, all right, well, we're continuously working through that. You might change your prompt, run those validation tests, and find that maybe you increased the precision, but you lowered the recall. And you would continuously be maybe adjusting that until you found the sweet spot of what you were happy with, and then push it out, and then continuously monitor that moving forward. And that's essentially what metrics-driven development ends up being, is that you're establishing those metrics early on and using those to drive how your AI model is responding over time. Before we go any further, any questions? All right. So let's go into, I'm going to go back to my slide deck here. We're going to talk through the next scenario. And this is a scenario that is related to, what if you have an AI chatbot that is focused on helping users book flights? Okay, it's a combination with maybe you have an actual chat interface where users can go on and they can interact with the AI model, and then as it's interacting with it, maybe it's going out and hitting another API that you have to actually book the flight itself. Well, the questions you're going to run into are, how do you know that the AI model is essentially identifying what the user wants? How do you know that, well, the user said they want to book a flight from New York City to Des Moines. How do I know that I'm actually getting that information correctly? The AI model is extracting that information I have. Or what if I'm telling it that, I have 2 passengers and how can I make sure that information is communicated back to my API in a good way, and even in the correct structure that I need it to be in? And then also, how do I know that it is able to differentiate between maybe I tell it, oh, I want to book a flight for tomorrow versus giving it a specific date. And it's able to make sure that continues to be the case. And this particular technique that you would want to use in that case is what's called intent and slot validation. And the idea behind this is that you're going to have the AI model establish what the intents are, which is basically what the user wants to do, and then take that and structure it in a way that's called slots that you can basically pass it back in a maybe a JSON format to your actual application that's using it. And then what you can do is, once you have it in that certain format, then you can take it and do whatever you want with it. You can pass it on to another API that actually handles booking that flight. But it's the idea behind this is that you're essentially validating that the data matches exactly what you're expecting in the format, so that the AI model is responding the way you need it to. And this is in addition to this, you're likely still going to have deterministic tests that are outside of this that would essentially mock AI responses. So let's look at an example of what this might look like in a demo. So I have another repo out there called intent and slot validation example. And in this particular case, I've got some commands here. I've had to switch between, I'm doing 3 different repos here. I got to remember what I'm doing here. But okay, so start with the first thing I want to show you is that if I run npm tests, these are the deterministic tests. I have 71 tests out there currently set up to just test everything before it hits the AI model and goes through that. In addition to that, outside of that traditional testing, then I would want to run something like npm. I have another command for run test intents. And this is actually testing how the intents part works. I have a set up data to actually do that. And I can actually show you what those tests look like. But it's designed to go through about 6 different tests and be able to identify, like, hey, I want to book a flight. And now I can deterministically say, oh, well, I expected book flight and I got book flight. And this is basically setting it up so that I can make sure that the AI model and the prompt I'm using are giving me the information I want back. So for example, like, tell me a joke. I want it, in this case, I put guardrails in it because I wanted to make sure that it identifies things that are off topic, such as what is the weather in Paris. But otherwise, it goes through and identifies all these things that check status and modify booking and so on. If you look at the tests that I actually have set up for this, these are not set up in a way that you would look at traditional testing. This is actually more around a script that I have that is set up in TypeScript right now. And so, for example, if you go into this test intents file, there are a number of I have tests here. So I have my test cases are in data. Yes, there we go. That's what I'm looking for. So I have set up certain test cases that I can use that I can send to it. I've also done the same thing with my slot tests, where I basically said, hey, I want to give it a query for fly to Boston, to New York City, and for a date and 2 passengers. And then it basically takes that and makes sure I get it in a certain structure. So all these tests are set up in a really, I would say, a different way than you might write, say, maybe like a jest test or something. So you would want to, and I would encourage you to go through this code and actually look at it and say, okay, yeah, I can see how that could be useful. Maybe you would want to do it a different way. This is very much just set up for this demo. But going through those slot tests, if I go, I can show you what the slot tests look like when they run. Right now, what it does is it goes through and it actually is running against the AI, and it's going to then evaluate whether or not I'm getting the certain slot information back the way I expected, and it continues to do this. Now, this is something that you would also probably only want to run during maybe a CI/CD pipeline and right before you get ready to deploy, because of the amount of time it takes, and also that you're doing it against a real AI. So I can see that my slot test completed. The last thing I wanted to show you related to this is I'm going to simulate an actual demo. So this would be a simulating an actual conversation that you might have where you're actually booking a flight. And it's going to show what this looks like in terms of the user experience. I'm trying to make this bigger a little bit because it's got a lot of information going on here. So the idea behind this is maybe you have a chat interface that you're simulating a user doing this where say, hey, I want to book a flight. And the actual intent is captured with, hey, it's going to book flight. And it's going to pass back the user ID. The actual bot would then communicate that to your application API layer, and then that you could use that to say, okay, I need to go maybe book a flight. So if it goes through this, you can see that eventually it gets down to here with slots filled. It's Boston, New York. I got the date. I got number of passengers, and I have the class. But the bot is continuously asking the user questions and say, okay, I want to book a flight. Great. Where would you like to fly from in Boston? And it's continuing to go back and forth with that. So you could create an assistant essentially where you could handle actually making some actions and going forward with that. And then finally, it simulates you getting a flight booked and sending back the user a confirmation. So any questions on this so far? And I've only tested this with one model, and I believe the model is Claude 4.5 Sonnet. But you very well could use these validation tests and test them against other models to quickly verify whether or not that model is going to work for you. Yeah. Okay, so how much time I got left here? 30 minutes? Okay. Wait, is it really 7:01? When did we start? 6:30? Okay. Sorry. Okay. So the next thing I want to talk about is validating safety guardrails. Is this very much focused on the idea of like, hey, we have a number of we may have a chatbot that actually has some different safety guardrails in place to ensure that the user isn't actually trying to inject certain information into it. They're not trying to get the AI model to go off its path. It's also, we're making sure that it's validating that we don't have certain PII information being sent to the AI model. There's certain things that we can use. One thing that I want to mention is that we're going to talk about is LLM as a judge. This is not the technique I'm going to use in this demo, but it's one thing to keep in mind. It's another type of technique where you could essentially try to set up a more deterministic way of addressing AI models by using a secondary AI as a judge. And I'm not going to say this is a good solution. It can be very expensive because you're paying for essentially 2 AI models. And you're in a position where you then become, okay, well, who judges the judge? That creates another problem for you. But the idea behind it is that, let's say that you create a test, an automated test that says, okay, if I send this information to the AI model, I expect this result to come back. Because AI models are non-deterministic, you're likely going to get a response back that's not going to be the same every time. It's going to be something that's similar. And because it's similar and not the same, you're likely going to have a way to determine if it is in fact the same thing. That's where you introduce a secondary LLM as a judge. And what you would do in that particular case is say, okay, well, here's my expected result. Here's what I actually got. A new AI model, LLM, tell me if these would mean the same thing. And so that is something you could do. And it is something that is an option. However, because you're essentially using a secondary LLM to judge the results of a first LLM, you are incurring, in a way, some like double cost in that case. This is not something that I would encourage you to do unless it's a very high availability, high critical path that you're like, we need to be confident in this. There actually are companies out there that are doing this. And Anthropic actually is doing this in some cases. They're using LLMs to evaluate the results of their LLMs. So I'm not going to say they're probably doing this on a large scale, but they're likely doing this in very critical ways. So that's just one thing I want to call out. So I'm gonna go through showing a demo of this. Give me 1 second here. I gotta pull it up here. Oh. So the idea behind the safety guardrails example is that we have an onboarding application chatbot, and it is designed around the idea that we want to, really want to focus on continuous monitoring observability of the system. I have some commands here I can run. I just won't remember exactly what they are. Okay, yeah, there we go. So npm. So the first one is npm test. This is just going to show all of the deterministic tests that I currently have out there. I have 60 of them. One thing to keep in mind, that I'm showing you all three of these examples, and I'm starting off with identifying that there are deterministic traditional automated tests that are there. You're still going to want all of those to be there on any application you have. You're still likely going to have 90% of your testing is going to be around using those traditional deterministic tests that are basically essentially mocking or using test doubles to represent your third-party AI model. It's maybe there may be 10% of the tests that you need to actually add to actually interact with the model to make sure it's performing the way you expect it with your maybe your prompt or how you have it set up. So the next thing I want to show you is npm test, or sorry, run test guardrails. This is a command I had set up in the package JSON, and what it's doing in this particular case is I have a number of test data, and I can show you that test data in a second here. But what it's doing is it's going through some tests that I have out there to validate that it's actually hitting my, that's operating the way I expected to handle the safety guardrails. In this particular case, this is an onboarding solution. So it's set up to have certain context around things like VPNs, access and benefits and so on. But I wanted to also make sure that I'm testing against, identify off topics. I wanted to test about injection, making sure that the user can't inject things that, to get it to do a different thing, or maybe jailbreak it for, but also, and let's say I'm invalidating using SQL injection as well. And so I have set up these tests. You're going to want to do something along these lines on a regular basis, because depending on your situation, but if it's a very sensitive system and you want to make sure that it's continuing to operate in a way that is safe, not only for your company, but also that it's not leading the user off topic entirely, this is what I would encourage you to do. But I will say this is something that I would look to actually establish this early on. I would want to make sure that I have guardrails in place and these guardrail tests in place way early on in the development, so that it's not something I'm thinking about after the fact. Because if I all of a sudden introduce this later on, then now I might have to blow up my entire prompt just to be able to handle this, and I don't want to do that. I want it early on to be something I'm thinking about. The other command right here, and I believe it's npm run test. Sorry, give me a second here. That's right, violations. Okay, so this is basically statistics that I have set up, or metrics that I set up. You might, if you had constantly measuring these violations over time as you're continuously monitoring your API, or not, sorry, your AI tool with all the interactions, this is ideally what you want to keep track of and say, okay, well, how many violations have I had? How many have been off topic, and so on. And that way you can set up, this can be used in collaboration with your metrics-driven development. And you can say, okay, I can see that in the last 6 months, I'm seeing a lot of people trying to hit this off topic, or maybe I'm seeing a lot of injection attempts. And maybe you, instead of it actually, before it gets to the model, maybe you can capture those early on so you can avoid having to actually hit the model in the first place. And so those are some things you can change about how you do the development. I mentioned that there's certain test data that I have set up for this. For example, is I have allowed topics and I have onboarding docs. This is the context that I basically set up in this particular repo so that I could pass it to the AI model using retrieval augmented, prompt engineering with retrieval augmentation, so that I can use loss of words here. But anyways, I'm providing this context to the AI model as an example of simulating the actual onboarding chatbot. So let's see here. Lastly, what I want to talk about is observability and debugging. These are things that this is going to be really related to your metrics driven development. Is that if you can log everything to do with how your AI model is being utilized, this is going to help you long term as you continuously debug and work through issues. Because a lot of the AI, not a lot, the AI models are essentially a black box. Once you send information into it, you're not going to be able to go back to it and say, oh, well, tell me about the history on this, and maybe walk through this. So you're going to have to use observability early on and do as much of it prior to it getting to the AI model that you can. And so, for example, is if I can keep track of how much, with my latency on the model, as soon as I send something to the model, how quickly am I getting it back? I can basically see that also if my tests fail and what my error rates are. This is going to help me in terms of debugging long term. Other testing options that I've looked at as well that are not probably good options. I mentioned the LLM as a judge already, but embedding similarity is one where you're taking what you would send to the AI, and you're taking the response back, or what your response back and what you expect to get back, and you're comparing the embedding similarity. That means you would have to convert them first to embeddings, and by converting them to embeddings, you essentially get these numbers back that indicate whether or not they're similar. This becomes a very complex process to do because you essentially have to set up an embedding database to do this, and an embedding process for doing that. It's an advanced technique. It's something that I wouldn't recommend. It likely doesn't actually provide the best ROI, and it provides a lot more complexity than you probably need. The second one is semantic assertions. This is not really, I would consider a testing technique so much as you're trying to look for keyword matching. So for example, let's say that you have an expected response back of a prompt of the AI model gives you something back, says, hey, you are booking a flight for New York City. You in that case, you would be saying, oh, well, I'm looking for terms like New York City and flight. And you would basically be reviewing the actual response back from the AI model to try to match the keywords to what you were anticipating. And it becomes a more complicated way of trying to create tests. And it's also become something that you're likely going to run into flakiness with that. It's not something that I would recommend. I would recommend that you handle that in different ways of the other solutions that I recommended. The last thing I want to leave you with is related to a decision framework on how best to handle testing approach when it comes to your AI solutions. First thing I want to mention is that you're still going to want to start all your projects and continue to use things like mocking the AI as a third-party dependency and writing those deterministic tests before you actually get to hitting the AI. That's going to be something you're going to want to do. I mentioned you're going to have 90% of your tests are likely going to be that. The next question you want to ask yourself is, do I need to extract any structured data from this? If I send this to the AI model, do I need to get it back in a certain way? For example, booking details, classifications, so on. If the answer is yes, then you likely want to add specific intent and slot validation. If the answer is no, then move on to the next, skip it entirely. Next question is this a high stakes or high volume application? Do you have thousands of users or potentially even millions of users are going to use this? Then it might make sense for you to use something like metrics driven development. But if you have a small application or a small solution that is likely going to have less than 100 users at a time, the amount of overhead that you would have to set up for metrics-driven development might not make a whole lot of sense. And so you could probably get by with essentially some basic monitoring and keeping that in check that way. It's really going to depend, I think, on your particular use case and how many people are actually hitting that AI model. And then finally, the last one is, can you actually validate quality with the code? This is basically the argument to say, hey, if you can do that, then do it. Use the deterministic test. But however, if you're in a very particular case where you're like, I'm not going to be able to do this easily, then maybe it makes sense to actually introduce something like LLM as a judge to actually evaluate the quality of it. And my hope is that you never have to do that, but there are certain cases where you may need to. All right, that is my talk. Anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of curious. In all the tests that you wrote for everything here, you're just using like normal frameworks. There's nothing special you need for your testing suite.
Yeah, so I actually, unlike when you would pull in something like Jest or maybe like Playwright or something, depending on what level of testing you're doing. In this particular case, I use none of that. I use no testing frameworks at all, no testing libraries. I'm simply I simply set up certain scripts to basically execute these against the model. So there may be things like that, but in this case, I wasn't trying to demonstrate particular libraries or frameworks. I was mostly just trying to go through different testing techniques and do that. So there very well could be a way to do that out there right now. There might be a certain framework or library that specializes in those types of tests. I'm not entirely sure, but in this particular case, I didn't think I needed it. So it's if I set it up the way I want it to, and then I get to the point where I say, you know what, now I just need to add maybe new test cases. Like thinking through the metrics-driven development, if I got to the point where I was realizing that there were a number of users that were sending content through that was maybe sarcastic but not harmful, then I may want to update my my validation truth data to include specific sarcastic comments and be able to indicate what I expect them to be. And then after, let's say that started making my validation tests fail, then I could go and actually address my prompt and everything that I'm sending and make those adjustments to keep my validation in check. I don't need to have any kind of framework to do that. I can just simply go to the ground truth data and update that. Now, in a production level system or something, I might have actually that stored somewhere else. Maybe I have it stored in a JSON file in an S3 document library, or maybe I have it stored in a particular database when I'm getting it. I don't know. It just depends on the situation and how it's set up. If I can get away with just storing in a JSON file in the code, then I'm going to do that.
And then, like, I mean, they would just build up like doing, where you just give them a function and you give them like your gold standard evaluation, and then it would call the LLM, give it feedback.
Yeah.
So I mean, but they're not that fancy. Like, if you want to do it yourself, I don't think it's that bad.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, if you start introducing that, now you add another dependency and you're adding additional complexity. So I'm always leaning on the idea that if I can limit the number of dependencies I have, then I can reduce the complexity of my system. So my first reaction is never to, oh, let me go find a library to do this for me. Mm. Yeah. Absolutely. What other questions are there?
Like the consistency or whatever, like 81 or like 85%. I was that at like one for like one of the prompts like with controls, it's like 80, I don't know, 85%. But so like accuracy like 85%. Now was that determined by the AI model or how did they come up with that?
So the number is actually completed by the script that I have here. Let me see if I can pull it up here. So the validation right now is I have some code in here that basically handles running the validation. And what that does is it actually, in this case, let's see here. One second, I'm trying to find out exactly where it's at. Okay, so there's some code in here that actually handles calculating precision. So in this case, it takes the number of truth positives and adds it to the false positives and divides by the total predicted positives. So there's some math in here that handles that. It would probably be easier. I mean, I think it'd take me some time to actually walk through it exactly, but there is some code in place to actually handle that math. Yeah. So there's some if you want to look through this, like I said, it's public and you can download it, you can fork it, whatever you want to do with it, play around with it. I'm going to use this as a way for me to like, I need to come back and show somebody, oh, hey, if you need an example how to do this, go to that. So I'm not saying that everything in here is probably going to stand the truth of time, but yeah. Anybody else have any questions? Yeah, what's up? Oh, Shift Interactive. So it's going to depend on the client, probably. It's going to depend on what they're, maybe they have a specific one they're already using. I don't know. But in this particular case, I typically try to focus on Claude. Usually my first choice. I have most experience with Claude, the models, but I would say that we may be in a situation where we need to use like a GPT model or a Gemini model or something. So, but in this particular case, with these types of the validations that we have set up, we could easily test this against another model and just change the model we're using and say, okay, are we getting the same precision and recall that we're expecting with those models? And then that way we can quickly switch out models if we need to in that development. And maybe if we could set it up so that maybe you're running a specific model in your QA and staging environment and you're having people hit it over time just to see those metrics are staying where they need to be. And then you're in the production, you may be using a previous model. However you want to handle that, would be like a way to be able to say, okay, we want to use this new model. Let's test this out and have people hit in that staging environment over some time. But that's what I would anticipate. Anybody else have any questions? All right. Well, like I said before, if you want to look at the slides or you want to actually get to the actual code, you can go to my website at travissmith.dev, and it's under conferences, and it's the top one there. So thank you.
Y'all use this thing again so that I can
Be heard. Yeah. Okay, cool. So again, next.